يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يرتوي بالحب قلبي، حب خير رسل ربي، من به أبصرت دربي. يا شفيعي يا رسول الله، أيها المختار فينا، زادنا الحب حنينا، جئتنا بالخير دينا، يا ختام المرسلين، يا حبيبي يا محمد. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، يا حبيب سلام عليك، صلوات الله عليك. أنت نور الله فجرا، جئت بعد العسر يسرا، ربنا أعلاك قدرا، يا إمام الأنبياء. أنت في الوجدان حي، أنت للعينين ضي، أنت عند الحوض ري، أنت هاد وصفي، يا حبيبي يا محمد. يا نبي سلام عليك، يا رسول سلام عليك، سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يرتوي بالحب قلبي حبي خير رسل ربي من به أبصرت دربي يا شفيعي يا رسول الله أيها المختار فينا زادنا الحب حنينا جئتنا بالخير دينا يا ختام المرسلين يا حبيبي يا محمد يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك رقت عيناي شوقا ولطيبة ذرفت عشقا فأتيت إلى
Historically,
حبيبي
Qur'an has a
فاهدك
highest
يا
reviews
قلب
over any other
ورفقا
quarter.
صلي
The
على
increase in this amount occurs
محمد
in capital IT is
السلام
unsustainable.
عليك يا رسول
Unreasonable,
الله
especially given the limited
السلام عليك
spending
يا
of
حبيبي
companies.
يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله يا رسول الله اقرأ يا محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله يا رسول الله. يا طيبة جئتك صبا لرسول الله محبا بالروضة سكنت روحي وجوار الهادي محمد. يا طيبة جئتك صبا لرسول الله محبا بالروضة سكنت روحي وجوار الهادي محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله يا رسول الله.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is your brother Maher Zain for my latest
رقت عيناي شوقا ولطيبة ذرفت عشقا فأتيت إلى حبيبي فاهدأ يا قلب ورفقا صلي على محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله يا رسول الله. قلب بالحق تعلق وبغار حراء تألق يبكي يسأل خالقه فأتاه الوحي فأشرق. اقرأ اقرأ يا محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي جئتك صبا لرسول الله محبا بالروضة سكنت روحي وجوار الهادي محمد يا طيبة جئتك صبا لرسول الله محبا بالروضة سكنت روحي وجوار الهادي محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله يا رسول الله عيناي شوقا ولطيبة ذرفت عشقا فأتيت إلى حبيبي فاهدأ يا قلب ورفقا صلي على محمد السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيبي يا نبي الله يا رسول الله.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. TMA welcomes you all back for the final days of the lecture series on the topic of spirituality and social life. My name is Ahmed Al-Zamar, and I will be your host for tonight. There will be a Q&A session at the end of today's lectures. The link should be found at the YouTube video description. Keep in mind that all questions will be anonymous and should stay on topic with the lecture series. Also, please note that the Q&A link will no longer be active starting at 7:50 p.m. So please submit your questions before then. We will begin with recitation from the Holy Quran by Brother Muhammad Abdul Radha. We're still waiting for the Shaykh Azhar Nasser to join us. So in the meanwhile, please extend salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Brother Abdul Radha, you may begin.
شكرا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما كان على النبي من حرج فيما فرض الله له سنة الله في الذين خلوا من قبل وكان أمر الله قدرا مقدورا. الذين يبلغون رسالات الله ويخشونه ولا يخشون أحدا إلا الله وكفى بالله حسيبا. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين وكان الله بكل شيء عليما. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا الله ذكرا كثيرا وسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. هو الذي يصلي عليكم وملائكته ليخرجكم من الظلمات إلى النور وكان بالمؤمنين رحيما. تحيتهم يوم يلقونه سلام وأعد لهم أجرا كريما. يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا وبشر المؤمنين بأن لهم من الله فضلا كبيرا ولا تطع الكافرين والمنافقين ودع أذاهم وتوكل على الله وكفى بالله وكيلا صدق الله العلي العظيم أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد. Jazakallah, Brother Muhammad, for a beautiful recitation. Now I would like to introduce, Jazakallah khair, shukran. Now I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Shaykh Azhar Nasser. Shaykh Azhar Nasser has a degree in cultural anthropology from the University of Michigan. After completing his academic studies, he pursued his religious studies at the Hawza of Najaf under the offices of Grand Ayatollah Sistani and Grand Ayatollah Al-Hakim. Shaykh Azhar is the religious director of CBE, an organization which specializes in the production of short, spiritually uplifting videos. Shaykh Azhar is the religious director of curriculum planning. He is also a co-founder of Tasneem Institute. Please welcome him with a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Unfortunately, this is our third and final evening together. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the tawfiq to come together and have a program in the future. Before I begin, again, I wanted to thank all of the organizers of this program for holding this important series. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them the tawfiq to continue to do good for our community. And may Allah Azza wa Jal reward them handsomely in this life and the hereafter. Continuing our discussion on spirituality in social life, there's a hadith that I wanted to share where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he speaks about the honorific title that was bestowed upon Ibrahim. You know, we Muslims, Christians, and Jews, we all identify as members of the Abrahamic tradition. Ibrahim alayhi salam is that great prophet who unites Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And in the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the supreme spiritual status of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Allah says, وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا, that Allah took Ibrahim as an intimate friend. Allah gave him this honorific title of being the friend of God, the friend of Allah. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he has a hadith where he explains why Ibrahim alayhi salam was given this title. Specifically, what did Ibrahim alayhi salam do to earn this great honor that Allah Azza wa Jal takes you as his intimate friend? The hadith from the Prophet says, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا إِلَّا لِإِطْعَامِهِ الطَّعَامِ وَإِفْشَائِهِ السَّلَامِ وَصَلَاتِهِ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that God did not take Ibrahim as an intimate friend except for the fact that he used to feed the poor. So there are three things that are mentioned here. There are three habits of Ibrahim that earned him this eternal honor of being the friend of God. The first is إطعامه الطعام. He used to feed people. He was such a generous soul that he used to seek people out to give them food. He would give food to the poor. In fact, he always insisted on having a meal with someone. He'd invite even strangers to come sit with him and have a meal. Ibrahim alayhi salam was indeed a lover of humanity. He used to invite, people who were passing by to come and have a meal with him. So he used to feed people. He used to feed the poor. Number two, وَإِفْشَائِهِ السَّلَامِ. He used to spread peace, meaning that when Ibrahim alayhi salam used to see people fighting, when he used to see conflict, he would try to resolve conflicts between people. He was a person that used to love seeing people come together. So he used to resolve conflicts and disputes. He used to spread peace. وَصَلَاتِهِ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. The third quality of Ibrahim that is mentioned is that he used to pray at night while others were asleep. When you look at these three qualities, you notice that two of them are related to interactions with other people. And this highlights that Islam is mostly about how you treat others, meaning that, yes, your relationship with Allah is the foundation, but your love for Allah, your nearness to Allah is expressed by the way that you treat other human beings. So out of the three qualities of Ibrahim that allowed him to earn the honor of being Khalilullah, two of them have to do with the way that you treat others. إطعامه الطعام. He used to look after the vulnerable, he used to feed the poor, and he used to spread peace. And one of the three is related to ritual worship. So this shows you that, ad-din mu'amala. Islam is all about how you treat other people. It's about upholding the rights of others. Now, when you look at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you find that the Prophet in his own community, even prior to the commencement of his prophetic mission, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was known as a muslih. He was known as an advocate of peace and justice. In fact, he was known as as-sadiq al-amin, the honest and the trustworthy, even before he announced his nubuwwah. When you look at the biography of the Prophet, you see that when he was in his 20s, and it's unfortunate, when we speak about the life of the Prophet, many of us, we begin his life at the age of 40 when he receives revelation in the cave of Hira. But the Prophet lived an entire life before the age of 40. What was he doing? How did he spend his time? Now we don't have that much information about the Prophet's childhood and his youthful years, but one of the things that we do know is that when the Prophet was in his early 20s, he was a member of an organization known as Hilf al-Fudul. Now, Hilf al-Fudul was known as a League of Justice. It was a coalition of social justice. And the story behind the establishment of this organization is that in Mecca, of course, Mecca was the place of the sacred house of God. It was an important religious destination. But in addition to that, Mecca was an important center of commerce. It was an important business district. And people from all around the Arabian Peninsula, they would come to Mecca to buy and sell goods. So there was a man from, the narration says he was a Zubaydi man. He was from a tribe, that wasn't part of the tribe of Quraysh. So he was an outsider, someone who belonged to another tribe. He arrives in Mecca and he has merchandise that he wants to sell. He's come to Mecca to perform some religious rituals, and he also has come to Mecca for business. When he arrives in Mecca, a man by the name of Al-As ibn Wa'il, this man who is an infamous personality in the early history of Islam, and his name should be familiar because this is the same man who mocked and taunted the Prophet after the Prophet lost his infant sons, and he called him Abtar, and which is basically essentially ridiculing the Prophet for not having any male offspring. So Surah Al-Kawthar is revealed as a result of that exchange. So this individual, and he's also the father of Amr ibn al-As. So it just goes to show you, what kind of family we're talking about. In any case, Al-As ibn Wa'il, he sees this Zubaydi businessman who arrives in Mecca. He has all of this merchandise, and Al-As ibn Wa'il offers to purchase it. He wants to buy the merchandise. But he tells them that, let me buy it on credit. Let me take the goods that you have and I'll pay you tomorrow. So basically, give it to me on credit and I'll pay you tomorrow. The next day, this man goes to Al-As ibn Wa'il and he says to him that, I'm here for payment for the goods that you took, that you purchased. Al-As ibn Wa'il says that, I'm not going to pay you. Who are you? Because Al-As ibn Wa'il belongs to the great tribe of Quraysh, and he took advantage of this vulnerable person who had no protections in Meccan society. So this man, he has no one to turn to. He goes to the different chiefs in Arabia, the different clans, the different chiefs of the clans, and they all dismiss him. No one takes this man seriously. He's an outsider. He's a nobody. He doesn't have a powerful tribe behind him. So they dismiss him. And you can only imagine how he felt. I mean, he was essentially robbed in broad daylight. So he goes to the Kaaba, and in a fit of desperation, he rips his shirt in front of the Kaaba and cries out that, "O people of Mecca, I have come to you and you have robbed me." And there's a lot of commotion around the Kaaba, and the Meccans, some of the more honorable members of Quraysh, they feel embarrassed that this is a man who has come to our city, and we're known for our hospitality, and they feel ashamed that such a person was exploited and taken advantage of in this sacred city. So a group of men came together to establish an organization that would look after the interests of the weak and the vulnerable and the marginalized. So you have individuals like Fadl ibn Fadala, Fadl ibn Harith, and Fadl ibn Wada'a, and among them is the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, and they established this organization known as Hilf al-Fudul. And it's called Hilf al-Fudul because most of the members of this organization, their first name is Fadl. Now, this organization is established for the sole purpose of defending the rights of those who don't have any protectors, who are marginalized, who are weak, and to stand against the perpetrators of injustice, even if they are one of our own, even if they belong to a powerful tribe like Quraysh. And the Prophet ﷺ, many years later, even after he began his prophetic mission, he was always proud of being a part of that organization. Now, even though this was an organization where the majority of the members were mushrikeen, and the Prophet wasn't the president of this organization, he was a member. The Prophet ﷺ used to say, لَقَدْ شَهِدْتُ فِي دَارِ عَبْدِ اللَّهِ ibn Jud'an حِلْفًا لَوْ دُعِيتُ بِهِ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ لَأَجَبْتُ. The Prophet says that I witnessed those days when we used to have our meetings in the house of Abdullah ibn Jud'an, when we established Hilf al-Fudul. And even today, if I was invited to participate in that organization, I would respond to them even today. So this shows us that Islam has no problem if we work with others, people of different faith traditions, as long as we are working towards a common good. We are working towards establishing justice. So you see that the Prophet ﷺ establishes this credibility in Mecca. He is known as an advocator of justice in Mecca, even before he's known as a prophet. He's a Sadiq al-Amin before he's recognized as a prophet of God. So the Prophet was involved in social justice initiatives even prior to the commencement of his prophetic mission. And there's another incident where we see how wise the Prophet was and how the Prophet always tried to reconcile differences between people. He tried to bring people together. And I think that we as Muslims, we're in dire need of muslihin, people who can reconcile, who can bring hearts together, people who can unify the hearts. We have plenty of people who fan the flames, but what we do need, we need people who have the wisdom and the social capital to bring hearts together. There was an incident that occurred when the Prophet was in his 30s, in his early 30s. So this is about 10 years before the Bi'tha. The Meccans, Quraysh, they were renovating the Kaaba, and they were making some structural changes. They wanted to increase the height of the Kaaba, for example, and because of these renovations, it required them to remove Hajar al-Aswad, and they made their renovations. And after completing the changes that they wanted, it was now time for them to reinstall the black stone. Now you have all of these clans who make up Quraysh. They're participating in the renovations of the Kaaba, and now all of them want the honor of installing Hajar al-Aswad. So what happens? They start fighting with one another. They're shouting, and they're literally about to go to blows with each other, until one of them suggests that let us resolve this conflict by allowing the next person to walk into Masjid al-Haram to be the arbiter. Whoever is the next person that enters into Masjid al-Haram, we will select them to be the impartial judge. So as soon as they come to this agreement, at that moment, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, he enters the masjid. And when they see the Prophet, all of them, they say, Al-Amin, the trustworthy one, has arrived. We are satisfied with Muhammad as our arbiter. So what does the Prophet do? The Prophet sees that there's an argument about who is going to install Hajar al-Aswad. And look at the wisdom of the Prophet. The Prophet doesn't shun them for fighting with one another. He doesn't say, why are you guys are all silly and ignorant. Why are you fighting over something so trivial? The Prophet ﷺ, he says to them that he takes off his abaya, his cloak, he places it on the ground. He says, give me Hajar al-Aswad. They give it to him and he puts it in the middle of the cloak. And then he tells the different clans, choose a representative from each of your clans to hold one of the ends of the cloak. So they all lift Hajar al-Aswad and then the Prophet takes it and he installs it. So you see the Prophet ﷺ, he was a reconciler. He was an agent of unity. He tried to bring people together. He always was the individual who was extinguishing the flames of hatred and animosity and hostility. Now, we've been talking about our social responsibilities as Muslims towards one another. And we mentioned that to be social is a part of our fitrah. You know, we mentioned that human beings are by nature social creatures. Now, naturally, when you interact with other people, you know, people have different backgrounds. They have different lived life experiences, different temperaments. So naturally, there is going to be conflict. You know, one of the things that is guaranteed is that when you're dealing with human beings, conflict is natural. You're going to disagree. You're going to argue with one another. Now, what is the Islamic perspective on dealing with conflict? Because conflict is inevitable. And unfortunately, you know, we go to school, we go to college and university, and you might have people that go and they get Ivy League degrees, but they don't ever learn conflict resolution. They don't learn how to resolve conflicts. And I think that this is an important life skill to have. Now, first and foremost, there's a hadith that I want to share with you that's from Amir al-Mu'mineen in Nahj al-Balagha. And it's a very important hadith. And it's the first saying in Nahj al-Balagha. So we know Nahj al-Balagha is divided into 3 sections. The sermons is the first section, then the letters, and then the sayings. And of course, these are the sermons, lectures, and sayings of the Imam that have literary merit. Because Sharif al-Radi didn't collect all of the sermons and the letters and the sayings of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, but rather he picked those expressions and those sayings and sermons and letters that showcase the eloquence of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. And this is why this compilation is known as Nahj al-Balagha, which means the path of eloquence. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, كن في الفتنة كابن اللبون لا ظهر فيركب ولا ضرع فيحلب. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, in times of fitna, when there is political strife and it's a time of great confusion, be like the 2-year-old camel whose back is not strong enough to be ridden and whose udders cannot be milked. It's a beautiful analogy and a metaphor that the Imam gives. You know, oftentimes when there are problems in the community, when there's fitna, there are in many cases, you and I should actually take a neutral position because the truth is not clear. You know, a lot of times we hear about drama in the community and it's all he said, she said. Amir al-Mu'mineen says that if the truth is not clear, if it's a time of fitna, meaning that you don't know where truth is and where falsehood is, it's a very obscure issue. Your responsibility is not to take sides. You're not allowed to take sides, especially if you don't know the details of this conflict. Amir al-Mu'mineen says you have to be neutral. You have to be like that 2-year-old camel who cannot be used. You cannot be exploited because a 2-year-old camel, it's too weak to be used. If you look at the life cycle of a camel, you see that Ibn al-Laboon is that camel who has a younger sibling who's being nursed by its mother. So it's not a baby and it's not an adult. It's at an age where it is essentially useless. It cannot be used by others. It cannot be used to carry goods or to be ridden on, and it cannot be milked. So Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he's saying that when the truth is obscure, when there is a fitna in the community, and you don't know who's right and who's wrong, you don't have enough information, Amir al-Mu'mineen says you should be neutral. Don't take sides. And believe me, if we just practice this hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we would save ourselves a lot of drama. We would save our communities from a lot of instability and gossip. So Amir al-Mu'mineen says, when the truth is not clear, you should be neutral. Don't get involved. If you don't know what the conflict is about, if you don't know what's going on, you should not get involved. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that whenever there's an issue, you should be neutral. Now, when the truth is clear, you should take a position. You should support the truth. If falsehood is clear, you should oppose it. But there are many instances where we don't know what the truth is. Things are too ambiguous and dubious, and therefore we shouldn't get involved. We should remain neutral until we have some definitive information. So this is an important lesson. We hear a lot of things, brothers and sisters. We see a lot of things. So instead of taking a position and siding with people who are our friends and people that we know, we have to be impartial. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "Kun fil fitnati kabn al-labun, la dhahrun fayurkab, wala dar'un fayuhlab." Now, if we go to, and I know time is very limited, but I'll just share a couple of a few ayat and a couple of traditions, and we'll conclude. If you look at Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 9, he speaks about an instance during the time of the Prophet where believers were actually fighting each other. So infighting between Muslims is not a new phenomenon. It happened even during the time of the Prophet. Now, what does Allah say? How should we deal with conflict and fighting between Muslimin, between mu'mineen? Allah says in ayah number 9 of Surah Al-Hujurat, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. If there are two groups of believers who are fighting, now notice here that two groups of mu'mineen are fighting. Allah still calls both of them mu'mineen. Oftentimes when we get into fights with others, we basically do takfir of others, that this person is a kafir, he's a munafiq, and we just start, throwing insults at each other. Allah says, وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا. If there are two groups of mu'mineen who are fighting, what should you do? فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. You should try to reconcile. And who should be the one who gets involved? Not just any, Tom, Dick, and Harry. The elders of the community, the people who are reputable, the people who have a track record of integrity, they are the ones who should get involved. The problem is when there is fitna in our communities, you have every individual getting involved. If you're not able to reconcile, if you're not a person who's known, who's a reputable person in the community, you shouldn't get involved. The problem is when there's conflict, we fan the flames. Allah says, فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. You should reconcile. And in most cases, we should stay silent and we should allow those who are qualified, those who are more experienced, those who are respected in the community, those who have a stellar reputation, let them get involved. At the very least, you and I should not cause any further damage. We should stay silent. فَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى. If reconciliation happens and there is a group that continues to antagonize, فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي حَتَّى تَفِيءَ إِلَىٰ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ. Then the believers should oppose the group that continues to antagonize. فَإِن فَاءَتْ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. If they desist, then you should reconcile. Meaning, don't hold grudges. Allah doesn't want believers to hold grudges against one another. Conflict is inevitable. We are going to argue, we are going to disagree, but we shouldn't hold grudges. Reconcile and let bygones be bygones. فَأَصْلِحُ بَيْنَهُمَا بِالْعَدْلِ. And the reconciliation should be based on justice. وَأَقْصِدُ, and be fair, be equitable. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. Allah loves those who are equitable and just. Now, I want to give you guys some practical guidance on conflict resolution. Now, again, people generally feel very uncomfortable with conflict. That's why generally people go along to get along, because people don't like conflict. Now, when there is conflict, people typically react in one of three ways to conflict. Number one, and this is really the most common reaction, is that we avoid it. People generally, they avoid the issue or they avoid the person because conflict makes people very uncomfortable. But that's not a solution. If there's conflict, the way that you deal with it is not that you avoid it. It doesn't mean that you just ignore the person or the issue, because that will allow it to fester, and then it will manifest itself in very unhealthy ways. We have to be adults, and we have to be able to address disagreements and points of conflict. A second way that some people deal with conflict is they become aggressive. They resort to verbal insults, and in some cases they resort to physical violence. And we don't want to do that. As Muslims, we want to be peaceful and we want to be civilized in the way that we resolve our conflicts. So the third approach, which is the ideal approach, and that is non-aggressive conflict resolution. And cognitive behavioral therapists actually have developed a six-step guide to conflict resolution, and they gave it. There's an acronym called STABN, STABEN. So I'll give you an example of a conflict and how we can work through this conflict by using this six-step conflict resolution guide. And so an example would be, imagine there's a married couple, and you can really use any example, but just to make it a very simple example. Imagine there's a married couple, and the wife sees that they're both working full-time, which is the case with many couples. They both work full-time, and the wife finds that she's cooking dinner and she's doing the dishes, and the agreement was that she would cook and the husband would do dishes, but she has a lazy husband. So this is a conflict now. So what's the conflict? That the wife is having to cook and do the dishes. Now, how do you resolve this conflict? So cognitive behavioral therapists say that the best way is to use the six-step guide. So the acronym is STABN, STABN. Now, it doesn't mean that you stab him. It's STABN, okay? So the first is the S. S means source. Now, if you want to resolve a conflict, you have to first identify the source of the conflict. You have to think, what is the real source of the conflict? And in some cases, it might require some reflection. Now, in our example, the source of the conflict is what? Is the husband, because he's not doing the dishes. So in this case, the source of the conflict is the husband's failure to help out with the domestic chores. So that's the source. Now this wife who feels that she's getting the shorter end of the stick, she's identified the source of the conflict. Now the second is time and place. We have to choose, if we want to resolve a conflict, if we want to discuss an issue that is bothering us, we have to choose an appropriate time and place to have this conversation. So an example of a bad time to bring this up is, it's in the middle of the week, both are exhausted, and the wife decides to, bring it up right before they go to bed or in the middle of dinner, or it's a dinner party, there are guests around, and she starts, blaming the husband for not doing the dishes. That's probably not a good time to bring up the issue. So a better time would be, when both are relaxed, it's a more comfortable atmosphere. It's a Saturday morning, a Sunday morning. That's a more appropriate time to bring up the issue. So S, source, T, time and place. You got to choose an appropriate time and place to bring up the issue. And A is amicable approach. Amicable approach basically means that before you actually bring up the issue that is the source of the conflict, say something nice to the person before you bring up what's actually bothering you. So in this case, you have this wife who's upset with her husband because he's not helping out with the dishes. Things are probably not going to go very well if you come out all guns a-blazing and you say, you don't do the dishes, you never do the dishes, what's the matter with you? I'm pulling all of the weight. A more effective strategy would be to use an amicable approach, to say something positive about the person first, because if you do that, they let their guard down and they're more likely to be receptive to your criticism. So the wife, for example, can say that, I saw that you did the lawn, you mowed the lawn the other day. I really appreciate that. You called my brother the other day and you checked on him. I really appreciate that. So mention something that you, and you have to be, of course, genuine. It needs to be something genuine and something that you really mean. You can't say something like, I really like your eyebrows. Anyway, why didn't you do the dishes last week? So it needs to be sincere, it needs to be genuine, and it should be as specific as possible. So when you use that amicable approach, the person lets their guard down and they're much more likely to be receptive to the criticism that's going to follow that compliment. Then you have B, and this is where a lot of arguments really take a turn for the worst. B stands for behavior. Identify the specific behavior that is bothering you. So in this case, the wife would say to the husband, on Wednesday, I had to do the dishes and I cooked dinner. Most people, when they're angry, they lump a bunch of issues into this one conversation. They say, you never do the dish, and they use absolutes, and you want to use absolutes. Be very specific. Be like, Wednesday, you didn't do the dishes. So point to a specific behavior. You're not going to get anywhere if you say things like, you never do the dishes, you're a jerk to me in front of your family, you forgot my birthday, and you just start piling on all of these other issues. You're not going to get anywhere. Focus on one specific behavior and be as specific as possible. On Wednesday, I came home, the dishes weren't done, and I had to do dinner. I had to prepare dinner. E, so STABE. Instead of talking about how horrible the other person is, a more effective way to resolve conflict is to express your emotions, meaning talk about how their behavior is making you feel. So instead of the wife saying that you are a useless jerk, say that on Wednesday, I had to prepare dinner, and I also had to do the dishes because you didn't do the dishes. And that makes me feel, underappreciated. It makes me feel angry. It makes me upset. It makes me feel sad. Whatever it is. The point is, and sometimes you have to really think about, how you actually feel. Are you angry or are you sad? So articulate to this person how their behavior is making you feel. And then N, which is one of the most important steps in conflict resolution, is what is the ask? What do I need? What do I need from you to resolve this conflict? And in this case, this couple, the wife would simply say that I need you to do the dishes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example. This is what I need for you from you to resolve this conflict. So what is the ask? So hopefully if we can implement this, it will make us much more effective in resolving our conflicts. And we should always look for opportunities to resolve conflicts, to be peacemakers. Because again, this is what made Ibrahim alayhi salam unique. وَإِفْشَائِهِ السَّلَامِ, he used to spread peace. I'll mention 2 ahadith from the Ahlul Bayt and we'll conclude and we'll begin our Q&A session. There is a great reward that is attached to resolving conflicts between people, reconciling the hearts. There's a hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ بَيْنَ اثْنَيْن مِنْ شِيعَتِنَا مُنَازَعَةً فَافْتَدِهَا مِنْ مَالِي. Imam al-Sadiq, he says that if you see 2 people from among our Shia, 2 followers of Ahlul Bayt who are fighting with each other, Imam al-Sadiq says, if reconciling between these 2 means that you come and you take my money from me to resolve the conflict, the Imam says, do it. Meaning Imam al-Sadiq says that I am willing to pay money out of my pocket if it will help reconcile between 2 Shias who are in a dispute. So this shows you how much the Imams want us to be at peace with each other. And then, of course, we have the famous statement from Amir al-Mu'mineen when he was on his deathbed. He says to Imam Hassan and Imam al-Hussein that reconcile between people. Make peace between people who are fighting. فَإِنِّي سَمِعْتُ جَدَّكُمَا يَقُولُ, because I heard your grandfather, the Prophet, say, صَلَاحُ ذَاتِ الْبَيْنِ, to make peace between 2 people who are fighting, to reconcile between 2 disputants, أَفْضَلُ مِنْ عَامَّةِ الصَّلَاةِ وَالصِّيَامِ. That act of reconciliation, of peacemaking, is more rewarding, it is more noble in the eyes of Allah than an entire year of recommended salah and fasting. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us among the muslihin, to make us among those who are peacemakers. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. So now we can open up the floor for Q&A. I believe we have about 15-20 minutes. So now the floor is yours, and it could be a question or a comment. We're gonna try to keep this as informal as possible.
All right, thank you, Shaykh, for another enlightening lecture. I just want to, Jazakumullahu khair. I just wanted to add something before we proceed to the Q&A. Due to security concerns, our audience is watching the lecture on YouTube exclusively instead of Zoom. We have received many questions from our audience over the past few days. So Shaykh, whenever you are ready to answer, I will begin reading them out.
Sure.
And we'll try to get through as many as possible.
Sure.
All right. So the first question we have is, there are 2 questions actually with regards to your discussion about the inherent need for social interaction. So it's a two-phase question. The first part is, if having limited interactions with the public is not a path towards God, why did Prophet Moses alayhi salam leave for 40 days to self-isolate in preparation of receiving the Torah?
Ahsant, very good question. So when we speak about self-isolation and seclusion, there is a place for that in our tradition. I mean, if you look at, for example, the practice of i'tikaf. I'tikaf is kind of a spiritual retreat where you stay within the confines of the masjid for a period of 3 days and you detach yourself from the world. But the point is that this is supposed to be a temporary thing. To make seclusion and isolation a way of life, a long-term lifestyle, this is where it's problematic. We know that Rasulullah used to spend time in the cave of Hira. He used to meditate and he used to worship. So we have ahadith that speak about the importance of seclusion, but we have to strike a balance. We have to also take into consideration the other traditions that emphasize the importance of being with the community, praying jama'ah, and being involved in social functions. So it only becomes problematic is if someone adopts seclusion and isolation as a long-term lifestyle. But if someone wants to dedicate a few days out of the month to kind of just being alone and detaching from the hustle and the bustle of everyday life, that's something that's commendable. And as I mentioned, we actually have within the Sharia certain acts of worship that are essentially a sort of seclusion, which is what we mentioned with i'tikaf.
Thank you, Shaykh, for your answer. I will read you the second question. Regarding introverts, do they have the same inherent need for social interaction? And how does it affect their spirituality if they naturally don't interact much with others? Thank you.
Now, of course, we have to go back to this this principle of لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. There are people who have social anxiety. I mean, I've met people who tell me that, Shaykh, I cannot handle being in social settings because I have really bad anxiety. No, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and by the way, we have to keep in mind that we're not saying that it's wajib on you to be social. We're saying that it has spiritual benefits that cannot be gained if someone decides to isolate themselves. Now, being a social person doesn't mean that you have to interact with thousands and thousands of people. It could mean, your family, your relatives, and you have a few friends. Some of us may enjoy face-to-face interaction. Others prefer to kind of interact virtually, through telephone calls, text messages. The point is that it's important to stay in touch with the wider community. Now, if someone feels that this is going to be detrimental to their mental health if they put themselves out there, then of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us better than we know ourselves, and He takes into consideration our condition, and inshallah we won't miss out on a lot of spiritual growth because of that.
Inshallah, Shaykh. Thank you for your answer. Regarding community building, this is also a two-part question, actually. So the first part is, what are some practical resources or advice for establishing better community cohesion and unity, including being more inviting to new Muslims? So that, yes, that is the first part of the question.
This is a very difficult question to answer because, as I mentioned in my lectures, we don't really have a lot of examples of model Islamic communities. And I think one of the most important factors in establishing a cohesive, healthy community that is going to attract people and where people really feel a sense of belonging, I think one important element is that communities need leadership. And specifically, they need spiritual leaders. And that's why it's important for masajid and communities to have resident scholars, to be connected to scholars who are trained in the Islamic sciences. Because I've traveled around the world, and I've been to many communities, and the problem that I would say 99% of them have is that they're essentially ships without a captain. Building a center and not having a resident scholar, or at least being in consultation with a scholar who knows the community, who's involved in the affairs of the community. It's like building a hospital and not having a doctor. So I think it's important for us as communities to get guidance and consult with scholars so we can identify what are the needs of the community and how we can achieve those needs. And unfortunately, there's a huge shortage of scholars. That's one of the great dilemmas of our time, is that we have a lot of doctors and engineers, and but we don't have ulama. We don't have English speaking scholars. At least we don't have enough of them. And I think the only way that we're gonna really change the landscape of Shia Islam in the West is if we start exporting our most brilliant youth to go study at the Islamic seminary so we can bring them back. You know, this whole idea of importing someone from the Middle East who comes from an entirely different cultural context, it doesn't work because you need homegrown scholars. So I think that we have to think 5, 10, 15 years down the road. We have to identify, you know, the youth, the brothers and the sisters who have a passion for the Islamic sciences, send them abroad for 5, 6, 7 years, however long it takes, and then bring them back so they can lead the respective communities. I think that if we just do that, we'll achieve a lot with respect to community building.
Inshallah, that will be possible. Thank you, Shaykh, for this answer. So the question continues, and it's very relevant to our situation. How do we build our community and our iman during the COVID pandemic? Thank you.
You know, as we've been discussing, you know, over the past 3 days, spirituality, building your spirituality is much easier when you do it as a group as opposed to an individual. And it's very similar to exercise. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's a lot more motivating if you have a workout partner. You know, if you go to the gym and you're by yourself, unless you're really motivated, but most people need that encouragement. They need someone to motivate them, to encourage them, to get them to push and do that last rep. Similarly, Allah in the Quran, he speaks about this dynamic, this need for communal encouragement. In Surah Al-Asr, what do we read? وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Now you would think that the surah should have ended there. Man is in loss, with time man is in loss, except for those who have iman and do good deeds. You would think that, okay, that's it, that's enough. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They have to, mu'mineen need to encourage each other to stand for truth and to be patient, meaning that you need that social support system. This is why it's important for us to establish things like book clubs, to establish, you know, Qur'an study circles, to have programs where we can keep each other engaged, because it's very hard to maintain your spirituality when you're alone. We need that support system. And one of the things that I've tried, that we just started actually last week with a youth group in New Jersey, and I think some other communities are getting involved, is that once a month we've decided to hold mock debates where you have Shia Muslims from around the country, and I'm basically overseeing this kind of project where we choose one topic a month and we debate it. And the idea is, for example, the first topic is the existence of God. So we have 4 to 5 youth from different parts of the world who are going to debate that God does exist. And then we have 4 or 5. So this is the mu'mineen group. And then we have those who are going to play the kuffar, who are going to basically play devil's advocate and try to prove that God doesn't exist. And this is, I think we need to create opportunities where youth can engage in active learning. You know, most of the time when we go to the masjid, the Shaykh or the Sayyid, you have a scholar who's going to sit on the minbar for about 45 minutes. And if it's an Indo-Pak community, it's going to be an hour and a half or 2 hours. That's how long the majlis is going to be. And it's usually passive learning. The speaker is communicating a message and you're sitting there and you're just listening. And chances are you're probably going to absorb maybe 20% of the entire lecture. And by the time you get home, maybe 10%. And within a few days, you'll forget everything that was said. So we need to move away from passive learning and transition to active learning. So with these mock debates, we have these youth who are going to spend the entire month researching arguments for the existence of God and arguments against the existence of God. And I think that that's how we can create a culture of learning. We have to be creative and innovative. We can't expect to teach Islam in the same way that it was taught 100 years ago. Youth, people want to be more engaged. People are much more educated than they were, 200-300 years ago. And I think that we do our audience a disservice when we constantly, focus on the basics. I think that in many cases, the audiences can handle more dense material, which is why over the past year or two, I've tried to tackle subjects in a bit more depth. Whereas before I may have felt that it's too advanced, but I think our audience, I think youth know more than they're given credit for, and I think that we have to kind of elevate the depth of our discussions.
Very well put, Shaykh. Thank you for your answer. I will proceed to a new question. How do we deal with people with negative attitudes who wrong or hurt us, and social interactions that are bad for our mental health? So how can we forgive people, and how do we build a healthy mindset and deal with negative emotions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in life, you're going to meet hostile people. You will inevitably meet individuals who are abrasive and who are not going to change. Unfortunately, there are people like that. Now, you're not required to maintain close relations with every person. Of course, you don't ever want to lower yourself to their level of hostility. Be kind, be forgiving. But if you feel that someone is causing you harm, you have a responsibility to protect yourself. And if the only way to protect yourself from harm is to disconnect from that person or interact with them in a very formal way and not get too close to them, then that needs to be done. But the way that you forgive, and it's not easy to forgive, especially when it's someone who was close to you, who hurt you. It's very painful to be betrayed and to be mistreated by people who are supposed to be your protector and who are supposed to care for you and treat you with respect. But one thing that I personally remind myself of is that, if you're only gonna be kind to those who are kind to you, there's really no merit in that. What makes a human being a quality human being is if they're able to forgive those who wrong them. That's the meaning of makarim al-akhlaq. When the Prophet says, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Makarim al-akhlaq is not to just be nice to those who are nice to you. That's easy. Anyone can do that. But what requires true virtue is to be able to forgive those who harm you, is to reach out to those who have severed ties with you, to give those who have deprived you. So remind yourself that this is why Allah sent the Prophet, to teach us to be more noble, to take the higher road. And another thing to keep in mind is that, the famous hadith of the Prophet, "Irhamu man fil ard, yarhamukum man fis sama." If we, you and I speak about myself, we've committed many sins, many transgressions. And if we want Allah to be lenient with us, if we want Him to pardon us, guess what? You have to be forgiving and tolerant of other people. You can't expect, if you're going to be a hardliner and if you're going to be unforgiving, and if you're going to hold grudges against those who crossed you or who insulted you, then expect the same strictness when you deal with Allah on the Day of Judgment. So if you want Allah to pardon you and to overlook your shortcomings, you have to find it in yourself to overlook the shortcomings of other people. And that doesn't mean that, you should just go back to, restore your relationship and just be lovey-dovey. You can forgive them, but choose to distance yourself. So you do yourself a service when you forgive others, because holding a grudge is a very heavy burden to carry in life. And we want to lighten this load on our hearts.
That is very excellent advice, Shaykh. Jazakumullah khair. How do we help people who have not been heeding previous advice regarding improving their attitude? How do we help fellow Muslims that are going astray or doing haram? Wal'iyadhu billah. Thank you, Shaykh.
I think that the best way to help people is by being a good Muslim. The best way to invite people towards goodness is to be good yourself. I remember there was a scholar who was telling me that there was a mother who came to him and she was complaining about her kids. And she's saying that, Maulana, my kids, they don't listen to me. You know, I tell them to do this and that, and they act like I'm not their mother, and they're so rude. And this alim, he was very wise. So she was complaining that my kids don't listen to me. And this scholar asked her, do you listen to your kids? They don't, maybe they learned not to listen from you. So I think it's important for us to really step back. And, you know, sometimes we're so focused on fixing other people that it's a lot more effective if we focus on our, now I'm not saying that we shouldn't enjoin good or forbid evil. You know, we spoke about the necessity of doing that and maintaining akhlaq and taking into consideration the person's reputation and their honor. But in many cases, if we practice Islam and we exude this joy and this inner peace, it's going to attract others. You know, people are going to want to know what you're doing, how you're living your life. You know, if you're a person who's at peace and who's calm and who's dignified and who's cheerful, people are going to want to emulate you. People are going to want to be around you. And, you know, this is why the Prophet ﷺ was so effective, because he practiced what he preached to such an extent that people used to convert just by looking at the Prophet, because he was such a sublime soul. He was so at peace, so dignified, that when people used to look at him, they would say, this is not the face of a liar. This is the face of a truthful man, a man of dignity. So, you know, we want to be like candles for people, meaning that, you know, if we illuminate our hearts by practicing Islam, by living in accordance with the law of Allah, we will be sources of light, and light is going to illuminate its surroundings. And inshallah, that light will reach others and it will inspire them to also return to their Creator.
Thank you, Shaykh, for your answer. I believe we have a few more minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. When you talk about guiding others, what does that mean? Does it include guiding them academically, for example, as a tutor or a teacher, or what is it? Thank you.
Now, it depends. So we have certain ahadith that speak about the great reward that Allah gives to those who are able to guide people to their Creator. You know, this is why the Prophet says to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ya Ali, لَأَن يَهْدِيَ اللَّهُ بِكَ رَجُلًا وَاحِدًا خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِمَّا طَلَعَتْ عَلَيْهِ الشَّمْسُ. Oh Ali. And this is why the Prophet used to always tell Ali that before you fight, invite your opponents to Islam. Give them a summary of what this deen is about. Invite them to Islam. Because if Allah is able to guide one person through you, and this is the key, you know, Allah is the ultimate guide. We simply want Allah to choose us to be the tools that He uses to guide others. We want to be His instrument in facilitating that guidance. So this hadith, it's very obvious that the Prophet is speaking about guiding people to the truth, guiding them to their Creator. But doing anything to enrich a person's life, help, you know, tutoring someone, improving someone's education, especially if you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to seek His pleasure, this obviously has a great reward. This falls under the category of helping someone, you know, helping a fellow believer. In fact, doing this, helping any human being for that matter, is a very noble deed. But some of the narrations are specific. And if you look at the context, they're speaking about guiding someone to Islam, guiding them to their Creator. And to be able to do that, you have to first have knowledge of your faith. And this is why increasing our knowledge of our faith is important.
Thank you, Shaykh. I believe we have run out of time for Q&As, unless you would like to answer a final question.
Yeah, we can spend maybe 5 more minutes. I don't want to turn anyone away. I wish I could stay longer, but I have a very tight schedule. But we can, inshallah, answer 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, perhaps a final question. Could you elaborate on Allah's subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance that you mentioned in the second lecture and how it comes to those who surrender to Him? Thank you.
there's a verse, there are many verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Yahdi man yasha wa yudillu man yasha. Allah guides whomever He wishes to guide, and He misguides those who He wishes to misguide. Now, what does this mean? Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala misguide people? This is a very confusing verse when you come across it, especially for the first time. That it seems at first glance that this is arbitrary. Allah guides whoever He wants to guide, and if He doesn't want to guide you, He doesn't guide you. But this actually goes back to our relationship with Allah. Meaning that if you look at the early history of Islam, there were certain people who believed in the Prophet, and there were others who rejected. You take someone like Salman al-Farisi. Salman al-Farisi wasn't even an Arab. Came from all the way from Persia. He found the Prophet and he believed in him. Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar used to be a highway bandit. He comes and he meets and he surrenders. And then you have a family member of the Prophet, Abu Lahab, who rejects. Why? Why are some people guided while others are not? Is it random? Is it arbitrary? It's not. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees something good in your heart, Allah subhanahu, and if there is a true thirst to know the truth, to know reality. There are a lot of people that claim to want to know the truth, but it's not a sincere pursuit. If you're humble and you want to know the truth and you have some good qualities in you. So for example, Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar became Muslim, but the reason why someone like Abu Dhar is given the tawfiq of hidayah is because Abu Dhar, even during the time of Jahiliyyah, he had a very noble quality. Yeah, he had certain, misdeeds, but Abu Dhar was always a very honest person. Yeah, he was a highway bandit. He committed certain sins, but there was one quality of Abu Dhar that was very unique, and that is he never lied. He loved the truth. And because of this noble quality, you see Allah gives him the tawfiq. Salman al-Farisi originally Zoroastrian. He wasn't born in a Muslim family. He was, geographically very far from the Prophet. But from a very young age, he was always searching for the truth. He was searching for the truth, and he was humble. And he was willing to endure being expelled by his own family. He was willing to go through any trial and tribulation to arrive at the truth. Someone like him, Allah gives him the tawfiq of hidayah. So what it means to be guided is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sees that we have noble qualities, when there is a desire to know the truth, when we truly want to be guided, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala arranges our lives in such a way that we meet the right people at the right time, and we come across certain books at the right time. So Allah facilitates our guidance. So this is what it means for Allah to guide. He puts us in the right places at the right times for us to find the truth. And in many cases, you see people who end up in prison, and then their inmate ends up being a Muslim, and then they're exposed to certain people and certain books that leads them on their journey towards God. This is tawfiq. This is Allah paving the way for them. But for this to happen, for Allah to give you the tawfiq, you have to show Him something. You have to show this desire to know the truth, and you have to have some noble qualities. There has to be some goodness in you for this tawfiq to be granted.
Thank you, Shaykh. Jazakumullah khair. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for the Q&A. I'd like to thank you, Shaykh Azhar Nasser, for answering all the questions we received. This was truly very beneficial and much appreciated.
Jazakumullah. Thank you all so much, Brother Ahmed, for being such a gracious host, and all of the brothers and the sisters who I didn't get a chance to personally thank. No amount of gratitude, is going to do justice to all of your efforts and your hard work behind the scenes. So I ask Allah. Allah is the only one who knows the sincerity that's in your hearts and knows how many hours you spent putting this program together. So He's the only one who is able to recognize your efforts and reward you. And I pray that Allah accepts everything that you guys have done. And I'm honestly very proud of all of your hard work. I know it's not easy to be able to bring all of these TMAs together. May Allah bless you. And if there's anything that I can do for you guys in the future, please consider me your humble servant. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. Thank you. I would like to thank all those people also who sent in their questions. We had many of them come in and apologize if we couldn't ask yours. We do, however, hope this series has been beneficial and that you were able to benefit from the questions we were able to ask. We would like to sincerely thank you, Shaykh Azhar, for your time and for spreading your wisdom with us during this lecture series. Thanks to you and your team for coordinating with us and making this event possible. We'd also like to thank brothers Jalil Malakzada, Muhammad Abbas, and Muhammad Abdul Rada for an amazing recitation of the Holy Quran, and to the rest of our volunteers and organizers from TMA, University of Ottawa, Windsor, Waterloo, Toronto, UBC, York, Queens, McGill, and Concordia. Thank you to all who donated, and on behalf of the TMA team, I would like to thank everyone for joining us in this lecture series. Inshallah, hoping to see you all again in future events. We would also appreciate your feedback if possible. Please click on the link found in the YouTube description box and fill out our very short questionnaire to tell us what you thought of this event. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook to follow our upcoming events, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, and thanks again, Shaykh Azhar Nasser.
رقت عيناي شوقا ولطيبة ذرفت عشقا فأتيت إلى حبيبي فاهدأ يا قلب ورفقا صلي على محمد السلام